And you're trying to give the young people something that will help them. Yet you don't know exactly what it ought to be.
Welcome to the Teach Thought Podcast. Our mission is to rethink what's possible, teaching and learning in a modern context. Join your classroom to the Teach Thought movement and be a part of the change.
Hello, and thanks for joining us again on the Teach Thought Podcast. I'm Drew Perkins, the Director of Professional Development here at Teach Thought. And if you're interested in growing with us, please visit us at teachthought.com/PD. We offer creative and affordable workshops in a number of areas, including project-based learning, inquiry, differentiation, technology integration, a whole host of things. But please reach out to us and let's co-construct and plan personalized professional development for you and your school. In today's podcast, I spoke with Cyndi Burnett, who is an assistant professor at the International Center for Studies in Creativity at Buffalo State University. She's also the author of a book called Weaving Creativity into Every Strand of Your Curriculum, and as a matter of fact, is one of our workshop facilitators on creativity here at Teach Thought. So if you're interested, after hearing this podcast and having her at your school, please reach out to us again at teachthought.com/PD and let us know. In this podcast, we spoke about creativity, of course, and defining it and assessing it and how that fits into standardized testing and Common Core. We also talked about how to foster what she calls organic and deliberate creativity and strategies for bringing that into your classroom. Hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the Teach Thought Podcast, Cyndi. Tell the listeners a little bit about what you do and where you're working there in Buffalo.
Sure. My name is Cyndi Burnett, and I am an assistant professor at the International Center for Studies in Creativity at Buffalo State, where I teach undergraduate and graduate courses in creative thinking and deliberate creative thinking. And as my research focus is around creativity, specifically in education, in all types of education, in early childhood, in K through 12, and in adult education. So my focus in the last few years has been around bringing creativity into the curriculum without having to give up any more time.
Right. Okay. And that's something that we're going to talk a lot about here. You have a book called Weaving Creativity into Every Strand of Your Curriculum. So yes. Lines up nicely with your research, right?
Yes.
So before we get into the book, tell us this International Center for Studies in Creativity, that is intriguing me. So tell us what, obviously you study creativity, but what all do you do? That's a big undertaking.
So it is, and it's an exciting undertaking as well. We are the oldest degree-granting program in creative thinking in the world, and we started back in the 1960s. I wasn't around back then. And we had a person by the name of Alex Osborne, and you may know Alex Osborne. He wrote the New York Times best-selling book, Applied Imagination, many, many years ago, back in the 1950s, but he also coined the term brainstorming. And he had a vision for bringing creativity into education, and he was actually from Buffalo. So he started something called the Creative Education Foundation and had a conference called the Creative Problem Solving Institute, which is still around after 61 years. And he met someone by the name of Sid Parnes, and Sid Parnes did a lot of work in organizations and worked together with Alex Osborne to think about how to bring in deliberate creativity. So this is back in the 1960s they started talking about this. At that point, Alex Osborne unfortunately passed away, and Sid met a woman by the name of Ruth Noller, who was a mathematician and worked on the first computers, and very smart, very, very smart woman. And together they started teaching these creativity courses. They didn't really know what they were doing, but it was trial and error at the University of Buffalo. And then they were brought to Buffalo State College, where our program began, and they did a very large study back in the early 1970s called the Creative Studies Project. And what they looked at was whether or not creativity and creative thinking and problem solving could be taught. And guess what they found out?
Yes.
Yes, creative thinking could indeed be taught. So that's where our program actually originated. So they started teaching courses, they began a graduate program, and after all this time, we have over 550 graduates that have a master's degree in creative studies, and it's a Master of Science. So we're not looking at the artistic expression process as much as we're looking at the creative thinking and problem solving and improving upon things process.
Interesting. So when you think about creativity, I'm sure you get this question all the time. Let's just go ahead and get it out of there. How do you define creativity? What is that?
It's a great question, and it's something that, as scholars in the field of creativity, we debate quite a lot. But there has been one basic definition that most scholars stick with, which is the generation of novel and useful ideas. And I've been working on some research with colleagues where we've been looking at the word creativity in relationship to originality and novelty and usefulness. And of course, the thing that is the most important is original or novel. And then usefulness is sort of secondary to that. But that definition was developed by Mostein back in the 1950s. And, many people have tried to say it's novelty and usefulness and claimed it as their own, but they actually wrote a paper on whether or not, when it actually came about, and it was through Mostein back in the 1950s. So that's the definition I stick to, novelty and usefulness. When I'm working with educators, I talk about novelty and appropriateness, because novelty, having something that's new, but it also has to be appropriate. So you want, students to come up with useful new ideas, but you also want them to be able to use them in appropriate ways that, you're not hurting anyone or you're not doing damage to anything. So using it in a positive construct.
Okay, so when we think about innovative education, how closely related is, obviously they're closely related, innovation and creativity, but what are the links, what are the differences, what's the Venn diagram look like there?
That's also a great question. Also something we debate quite a bit.
Right.
But we look at creativity as the front end. So when you're generating ideas, the process that leads to innovation. Innovation is what comes out once it's out in the marketplace. So once it's been produced and we look at, what are the sales on that? That's innovation. The process that took you to get to that innovation is creativity. Okay,
so creativity is the process, innovation is the product.
Yes, that's how I look at it.
Okay, well, that makes perfect sense. And so when we think about creativity in the classroom, one of the things that I think is, and I'm sure it's a big debate, not only teaching it but assessing it, and that's been a hot topic as we think about project-based learning and authentic learning and getting kids into those 21st century skills, those 4 C's, and creativity being one of them. Yeah. Some people say, well, first of all, you can't teach it, but then second of all, and I'm not sure. It's curious. I'm wondering if it's as much teaching or sort of setting the stage for creativity, because as an artist myself, as a musician, you don't just say, all right, at 2:30 I'm going to be creative, but sort of setting that stage and setting that scene. But then how do you assess it? Is it accessible?
Those are great questions. And you're actually talking a little bit about something I've been working on, sort of my next book idea, which is around setting the stage, what you talk about, setting the stage and setting up the psychological environment for creativity to happen. And what I'm terming this as is organic creativity. So if you set the stage in the right way, both psychologically and physically, but most importantly in the psychological arena, then you're more likely to set up a place where students feel comfortable being creative. So let me give you some examples of that. So idea support is one, and being able to share new ideas and get support on those ideas. Not saying, that's a great idea, you should do it, but listening to students' new ideas. Having trust and openness between the student and the teacher. And this is something I think is the most important thing that has to happen in the classroom, is the student needs to feel safe to share new ideas. I have a friend who was just telling me a story about her daughter who was in a middle school classroom, and the student questioned the teacher on what she was teaching, and the teacher said, I know the answers, not you.
Right.
When you do things like that, even one time, you're killing the creative environment. So instead of allowing for students to question things, they're just expecting to be like this, the sage on the stage and knowing all the answers. And I think when teachers can be open to the fact that they're learners as well, of course, they've been doing it for years, they have the content knowledge, but, it's great for students to have that ability and space to ask questions. Also, to be able to come up with different ideas. And I think in many cases, we're so focused on standardized testing, and there's one right answer to things. But the challenge becomes is teachers are teaching their students, as they should be, because that's what they're being assessed on. They're teaching their students there's one right answer. Well, in life, there is not usually just one right answer. And for the things that there are just one right answer for, we can find out through doing a quick Google search.
Right.
So what are we actually teaching our students? And I see this all the time when I'm teaching an undergraduate course, and I'll start tomorrow this course, but it's very consistent that what happens is students come into my undergraduate course as freshmen and they start saying, okay, great, creative studies. Okay, what's the right answer to this? And I'm like, no, we're going to explore something. We're going to look at multiple answers. We're going to look at multiple questions.
Mm-hmm.
And then they say, well, which part is going to be on the test?
Right.
And it's like, nothing is going to be on the test. Let's take the test, tear it into pieces, and throw it in the garbage. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing to be testing. You know, there are certainly places we need to test our students to make sure that we're keeping up with the knowledge that they need to know. But there's been such an overemphasis on testing that students have lost the ability to ask good questions and to look at multiple answers. So going back to setting the stage, what you were saying, I absolutely think we need to set the stage for students in organic ways. And the second thing I'm looking at for this next book is around deliberate creativity. So once you've set the stage for creativity to naturally happen, then how do you deliberately bring it in? And we can do that through things like what you mentioned, project-based learning, and looking at the stuff that I have in the Weaving book, and design thinking and creative problem solving, and all these methodologies that we can bring into the classroom deliberately to help nurture that creative thinking. But the first thing that needs to happen is you need to set the stage psychologically.
Yeah, it's funny you went right into you sort of stole my next question, because I'm a big proponent of inquiry and asking questions, and that was one of the things as I was thinking about that is like, so it's not about answers, it's really more about questions, and
Yes.
and allowing, first of all, as teachers and as educators, asking great questions. But I just tweeted something out recently that good teachers ask great questions, but great teachers or facilitators are the ones that sort of set the scenarios that allow everybody that sort of get great questions to sprout from everybody, and that's a real art there. And so, I guess, can you talk a little bit more about that relationship between inquiry and questioning and then that creativity?
Well, I think if we look toward the future, we're really looking at students being able to ask good questions, like you mentioned.
Right.
In the Weaving book, the very first chapter is around curiosity. And I think being curious is one of the things that leads to creative thinking, to great creative thinking. Because if we question things and we don't make assumptions, then we're allowing our students to use a different set of skills than just answering the right question. One of the techniques that we use in the Weaving book is just to have a flip chart on your door as students come in and give them Post-its before they leave class. So say you're teaching a history lesson and you say, okay, I want you to read pages 1 through 30, and then I want you to come in with questions that weren't answered in the text. And what is it that you are curious about with regard to this content? And as the students come in, those questions are posted on the door on the flip chart, and the teacher begins with those questions to honor those questions.
Right.
And it's just such a simple technique that a lot of our teachers that I work with have adopted, and they say, wow, it's just one simple thing, that one little thing that changes the dialogue, that gets students looking at something other than what is it I need to memorize for this test that I'll probably forget, 3 months later.
Yeah, that idea of playing school that you mentioned of, just tell me the answer. And when I was in the classroom doing that project-based learning, doing inquiry, and really shifting that paradigm, there's a lot of students who enjoy that and see the value. But then you get some who are so tied into playing school that they're just saying, don't just give me the worksheet. How do I get my points? And even when I did some things like Socratic Seminar, where you're having students pre-generate questions based on a text and really come in and lead their discussion in amazing ways and directions I had never necessarily anticipated. I would initially see students. They would look at me. They'd ask a question in the Socratic seminar and look at me like, did I get my points? And I'm like, no. That's not what we're after here, right? So breaking that mold absolutely is really, really difficult. So. And I think it's important, too, as you think about not just, it's the same paradigm, right? When you think about adult learning and, really honoring the voices in the room. And when we talk about doing work and workshops and professional learning with teachers, those teacher questions, and that is the piece that really drives and should drive a lot of the work that we do, which I don't know if that's necessarily creativity, but, really shifting that paradigm from that sage on the stage that you mentioned to, all right, what is it that you need to know? And that's really, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, authentic. Yeah. That's the thing that drives everything. So the teachers aren't saying, this is what you need to know. Students are saying, hey, this is what I need to know. Can you help me learn that? And that really shifts things. So when you think about Common Core, and I don't know if Common Core is what the state of Common Core is in your state, and obviously you don't use it in higher education, but when you work with teachers, what's your take on Common Core?
There are certainly positive things about Common Core, but mostly I think we're trying to shove our students all into one place, right. And I think that's very dangerous. And I've heard from a lot of teachers that honestly they're burned out, that they want to leave, that they have so much pressure to adhere to these guidelines and where they need to get their students. My very best friend is a kindergarten teacher, and when she started teaching 10 years ago, she said, what I'm teaching now is what second grade was learning 10 years ago. And she said, when I look at my time and my curriculum, she said, I have no time to actually allow for everything that needs to be taught. And she said, so the first thing to go has to be playtime or recess.
Right.
And that's what the kids need at 5 and 6. They need time to explore. They need time. So much of it is social at that age. But there's such a focus now on this academic side at such an early age. And I don't know why they're doing it. And I don't know why there's so much testing around that early childhood age when there should be so much more focus on play and exploring and, project-based learning. And I hope that things do change. And I just finished a chapter for a book called Contradictions in Education. It was edited by Ron Beghetto, and it will be out later on this year. But I talked about, so many people are on two ends of the spectrum, like we need to stay with Common Core and it's great. And then this other side, it's like we need a revolution on education. And my article was about we need an evolution of education, that we need to start looking at what is working and do small experiments in our classrooms. And we need to allow teachers to try new things and to not have to go by a script. So I work with, and so many of our graduate students are educators, and they say, I have to read a script. I got a master's degree and I'm standing there reading a script and my principal's walking past my classroom to make sure that I'm reading on the same page as the next teacher.
Right.
And then what's crazy to me is when I go in to do creativity training and teachers say, okay, this is great. We love this, Cyndi. Now, can you give us a script on how we do this in the classroom? And it just makes me want to hug everybody because it makes me so sad that so many gifted teachers are out there and they're stuck with this set curriculum that quite honestly doesn't meet the needs of a lot of children. We're looking at the middle of the road, but then you look at gifted students and they're getting frustrated. You look at I know a lot of highly gifted creative children who parents have had to pull them out. They've contacted me because they said I had to pull my student out of public school because they're just miserable. There's no space for creativity and they're being squelched.
Right.
And, there's been a lot of research studies on kids who are creatively gifted and who are doing terrible in school, and teachers don't look at them in a positive light because they don't want to conform to what the teacher is doing. And they're often just neglected because, they might not want to conform to, I want to know all the right answers, and they want to try new things, but there isn't the space for that in the curriculum.
Right.
So,
yeah. Go ahead.
So a lot of times when I go into schools and I'm working with students, and we do creative activities, the teachers come to me. It's very common. The teachers come to me and they say, it's not the smartest kids in the class that really succeeded at this activity. Mm-hmm. It's a whole other group,
right?
Who are often struggling through school that are really succeeding in this activity. So I always find that very interesting.
Yeah, there's an activity that I used to do with my students, and I now do when I do workshops quite frequently. It's called the scissors game, and it does require some real divergent thinking and coming at things. And one of the things that I usually say as sort of a debrief is that when I did it with students, and I think there's some validity too with the adults, that I often found, and one of the things I loved about it was that when I worked with students doing it, was that the students, like you said, who weren't necessarily your good students, your ones who are good at playing school, getting good grades, and conforming, they tended to get the right, and they tended to figure it out more quickly than those who are the quote unquote good students. And I said, anecdotally, I don't know the answer. I don't know why, but my hunch is that those who are good at playing school are really used to getting the right answers, being right quite a bit, and so being able to sort of back out and think differently about something and say, well, I might be wrong here. I'm going to sort of take a big picture look again and come at it from a different angle. That's really hard for them. But for students who struggle, they're sort of used to being wrong, and
right.
That's sort of their MO is like, well, I'm wrong a lot. I sort of joke and say, I'm wrong a lot, so I'm probably wrong here, and let me take a different look at it. And it's nice because I could reward them, at the beginning of a class. I usually did it towards the beginning of a semester, beginning of the class, and so it helps build that relationship and sort of sets that scene that you sort of mentioned for that organic creativity. Yeah. Absolutely. And I spoke with I don't know if you know Yang Zhao or know of him. I just spoke with him for a podcast, and mm-hmm. he's a big proponent of kind of almost extreme, like really getting away from anything that's standardized, and Common Core is really damaging our kids, and I absolutely believe in a lot of that. I've seen states that there's a school in which I work in Texas, and they don't use Common Core, but they have this sort of really prescriptive curriculum, and I'm working with these elementary teachers, and they literally have they have what they call lanes. So the first grade teacher, the kindergarten teacher might have kids talk about or understand what rocks and soil are, but then the first grade teachers can talk about what you could do with it. And the kindergarten teachers say, well, we can't get out of our lane and talk about what you could do with it. And I'm like, wow, that just blows my mind.
Right.
Because we're staying in our lanes. And, I have a first and third grader, and in a school in Kentucky here, we have Common Core. And I still see, even our school, which is pretty innovative and they think outside the box a lot, they're still not the room for creativity and play that we'd love to see. And I think Common Core is, to me, it's a tool, and you can look at it as sort of a guide. But you're right. I think there's a lot of schools, and I'm sure you're seeing those teachers, and I've seen them too, say, well, it's telling me what I have to teach, when I have to teach it, and although I think that's more a function of the school and the school district, because it doesn't necessarily say that. But anyways, that's my soapbox. It's something that can be used, I think, just as well as other things to sort of guide some of the sort of sophistication of thinking, but doesn't tell you exactly what you have to teach. And so why would you feel tied to it? Nor should we. But I think there are schools that do that. Right. So tell us about the book here. It was out last year. Tell us more about it. What it's about. You're talking about weaving creativity into every strand of your curriculum.
The Kindle version is actually 99 cents because we really wanted to make it accessible to all teachers. So it's less than a cup of McDonald's coffee.
And better.
Yes. So when I was going out doing trainings with teachers, what I found is they loved the notion of creativity, but they said, okay, we need something quick and easy. I don't even have time to sit and read a book on how to bring creativity into my curriculum. So what we did, and I did this with my colleague, Julia Figliotti, is we were going out and we were doing workshops with teachers, and obviously I have a network of 550 creativity experts, and asking them about different creativity skills. So I mentioned curiosity, which is one of the skills, and I said, okay, so how could you take curiosity and bring it into your classroom. And we focus on 12 different skills. And so what they came up with is they generated a lot of ideas, and we had probably 1,000 ideas, and then we brought that down into 750 ideas. So for example, in curiosity, find times to reward fluency versus accuracy. Pose a weekly challenge to your students. Use riddles in the classroom. Share quotes about challenges and taking a positive attitude. Oh, that's actually embrace the challenge. So let's look at produce and consider many alternatives. One of the ideas is to have students think of a variety of different strategies for studying for their exams. Or use a word dance, which is, if you take a word and you think about all the different ways it could be said. So it's actually 750 quick ideas on how you can bring creativity to the classroom. And the feedback that we have received on this book is extremely positive, because even I was actually working with a principal last week, and I gave her a copy of the book, and she said, "Cyndi, I can't believe it. I opened the book and I had some ideas for my teachers." And she said, she said, I didn't even, I read it as I was walking to the bathroom and I got an idea. It's like, if you're looking at Harry Potter, think about Harry Potter if the story had been a woman a girl instead of a boy. Or what if Harry Potter had been inducted into Slytherin, instead of Gryffindor? What would have happened? How would the story have changed? Let's look at it another way.
Right.
So it's taking these skills like be original, and how can you be original in the specific content that you're teaching? How can you get students to be original? So whatever content you're teaching, you can take the idea or the skill and weave it into your classroom. So one of the things so I have some teachers working on the book right now, and I work with groups, but they said, one of the things I have them do is go through the book and highlight all the things they're already doing. Because so many teachers say to me, Cyndi, I don't really feel like I'm creative. And I'm like, okay, take the book and go through and highlight all the ideas that you're already doing in your classroom.
Right.
Because these ideas were developed by teachers and creativity experts, and a lot of them will be familiar to you. So it won't be like rocket science, like, whoa, I never thought of doing that. A lot of them will be very familiar to you. And then go through and think about what are the things that you would like to try in your classroom, and highlight those with a different color. And then the other thing we ask teachers to do is think about the lesson that you really despise teaching, that lesson that you think is really dull and boring, and then try to turn it into something that's really fun and engaging. And, I think my life purpose in my professional world is to really focus on engagement through creativity and creative thinking strategies. And that's really what we're aiming at with the Weaving book, is to engage students in meaningful learning through creative thinking, and how easy it is to do that.
Right. Yeah, it's funny when you talk about generating ideas or being creative, I'm sure you hear it all the time. Well, I'm not creative, it's sort of a cop-out, sort of like I'm not good at math, but
right.
But you do it all the time. You just aren't good, maybe you aren't comfortable with that, or, whatever. But yeah, I think it really sort of begs for a redefinition of of what creativity is. And, I think probably most people think, when you think creativity, they think like art, right?
Right.
I mean, that's, music or art or something like that. But it is really more about ideas and thinking. And maybe the art, music or whatever is the product. But there's lots of different ways to be creative. Absolutely.
That's right. And it's interesting to me that when I talk to teachers and they say I don't feel creative, I'm like, have you had a student or a challenge in your classroom in the last week where you didn't have a solution at your hands and you had to figure it out? And they always say yes, without hesitation, yes.
Right. Okay.
That's creative thinking. And even just looking at things from multiple perspectives, it's all about creative thinking. And when we look at creativity as this overarching, it's about the arts, it's about so much more than the arts. It's a yes and.
Right.
Because, my background is actually in the arts. I used to be a professional actress. And I can tell you, I did the same show 180 times, and it wasn't creative at all. So, sometimes art is just replication. And artistic creativity, when it comes to coming up with new ideas, that's where creative thinking really lives, not in just replication.
Right. So you mentioned the Yes And, which is, there's a book called Yes And from the Second City folks, which I think is really, really great, and I incorporate some of that into my work, that improvisational piece. Is that what you're talking about, the Second City sort of improvisational thing?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have some experience with that, or are you just sort of building upon the ideas? You mentioned being an actress.
Yes, just building upon some of the ideas around improv. And I mean, we talk a lot about yes and creative thinking. It's like, okay, I like this idea, and it's this, and it's this, and, instead of but, because and feels so much better than but.
Right. Yeah. So when you think about resources and things that you've come across, things that you've seen, schools that you've come across, books, videos, movies, anything that's sort of made you think differently, sort of a profound thing, something that you say, boy, listeners should really check this out. What are your big recommendations on those kinds of things?
That's a great question. What is the biggest resource? I'll tell you about an article that James Kaufman and Ron Bagetto wrote, and it was about appropriateness and creativity, and I can send you the link. Yeah. But they talk about in this article that I believe was in Roper's Review around appropriateness and creativity. And they said, if you think about our ability to be Superman, that's our creativity. So we can be Superman, and there's a time to be Superman with our creative thinking. But most of the time we're Clark Kent. And that's okay. So what we need to do is teach our students how to be creative in appropriate ways. And that gave me a really strong feeling of, yes, this is where we need to go with education. Because as I mentioned, with students who are highly creative in the classroom, we need to give them the space to be creative. And I'll give you a great example. So I have a son, and he is now 7. But when he was in preschool, he loved to be a car. He always wanted to be a car, so he would be flapping his arms and making these vroom, 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 vroom noises.
A flying car.
Yeah, he was a flying car. And everywhere we went, he would put on his jacket, which was a Cars jacket, the Pixar Cars film. Right. Put on the jacket, and he'd vroom, 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 vroom.
Not the Rick Ocasek cars.
So it was a little bit embarrassing for me, because I'm like, okay, James, let's not be the car right now. Let's not be the car. And he would say, but Mom, I love being the car. And that's sort of how he was sort of expressing himself back when he was in preschool. But everywhere he went, he was a car. So he started preschool, and I was really nervous about what the teacher was going to say. Like, he doesn't know how to put away the car. So I said to the teacher, our first conference, I said to her, so have you seen the car? She goes, oh yes, I've seen the car. And I said, and I'm like, oh no. So I said, and how did it go? And she said, well, sometimes it's okay for him to be the car, and he's around the classroom and he's the car. But sometimes it's not okay. So I asked him to park the car over in the corner and join me as James. Uh-huh. And that's such a beautiful example of using creativity in appropriate ways. Right. Because it was like, yes, she allows him to be it, and other times she asks him to put the car away in the parking spot and to join us as him. And as soon as she did that, he understood when it was okay for him to be creative and when it was not. And I mean that in a way that it's okay to come up with ideas a lot of the time, but some of the time you need to focus on, penmanship, right. Or sitting down with a group and listening. And that's, I think, such an important piece of the puzzle around creativity and education. Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you one last question here before we wrap up. If you were going to design a school, if you could design a school for your son or for the rest of the world, what would it look like? If we walked into it visually, what would it sound like, feel like, look like, that kind of thing?
Well, I'm very fortunate that I get to send my kids to a school that I do believe is as close to the ideal as possible, and that's it's a school called Elmwood Franklin School, and it's a private school, so they don't have to abide by standards and Common Core and everything else like that. And one of their core values is creative inquiry. But when I walk in the door, all the teachers look well rested. And that is not something I typically find when I walk into a public school. Unfortunately, right. I see teachers that look exhausted, right. that are that look like they need a hug and a nap. Right. But in the school, Elmwood Franklin School, when you walk in, there's just a buzz around, and you'll see students skipping down the hallway. And it's a age 3 through 8th grade school. And they, the kids, the older kids work with the younger kids at certain times. The 8th graders have an ideas project where they take a topic that they're passionate about and they research it. They create something with it. They do a presentation to another class. And I go and I work with them, and they each come up with 100 ideas for the potential project. And together there's about 4,000 ideas all over the walls. Is it about 4? Yeah, because there's 40 of them. So there's just ideas all over the place, and it's really welcomed to come up with new ideas there. And when I was talking to one of the teachers, he said, we have a relationship with our students where it's respective questioning, where they can ask us questions in a respectful way. So they're not being, condescending or, sort of smart Alex, like, why are you teaching us this? But it's like, I'm curious why you're teaching me this right now when, ... Right. And so it's just a place that's very open, and parents are welcome to come into the classroom and be a part of the school. Mm-hmm. They have a Reggio Emilia early childhood program, and I love the Reggio Emilia approach. It's a newer approach that's come here to the States, but I think it really encourages creative expression in a way that Montessori does not typically. Typical Montessori does not have imaginative play. Right. A lot of Montessori schools do have imaginative play, but that's not a standard Montessori school. So Reggio is all about the 100 languages of children. And the 100 languages of children means that children express themselves in more than just one way. Right. And how do we honor those voices of children?
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Very interesting. So, and I believe, and I think you probably do too, that that play is not just for the younger. I mean, we talk about recess and those kinds of things, but as adults, we need brain breaks, and there's no reason why high school age and or college age doesn't have or shouldn't have those same brain breaks as well. And that's one of the things that is one of our sort of guiding principles here at Teach Thought is learning through play, and I think that goes all the way up to from birth to death.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. In fact, this semester in my undergraduate course, I have a day off where I say go and play. And they have to come back and report on how they played, what they played, right. What their version of play looks like. So we'll do a whole piece on play.
Right, that's fun. Okay, so as far as links and places to find you, and you said you're working on another book. I don't know what's the timetable for that. Do you have a title or anything?
Not yet.
Okay.
No. This is my newest thinking, so it's not quite titled yet, but
all right.
It's being morphed out right now.
All right. So where can the listeners find you? You have a website and Twitter. I know you have Twitter, but tell everybody where they should go to find you and connect with you and get some of your thinking.
So CyndiBurnett.com is one place they could look. I also have a Facebook page, Cyndi CYNDI, like Cyndi Lauper. Mm-hmm. Cyndi Burnett. They can find me on Facebook. So I do a lot of posts there. We have a Weaving Creativity Facebook page as well, where we post a lot of things on education. And I've also done a MOOC, a massive open online course on igniting your everyday creativity. And that's totally free of charge. And you can find that on Coursera. And there's another course on Udemy on bringing creativity deliberately into the classroom with animated videos that I guide teachers through a course on creative problem solving, so they can use all the videos for their classroom. Nice. And that's on Udemy. So those are some places you can find me.
Okay. And you're on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle?
It's Cyndi Burnett.
Okay. So at Cyndi Burnett. So I'll try and remember. We talked about a lot of links and a lot of different people, and I'll try to remember to get all those in the show notes on our webpage. But if you can, I'd love to check out that Appropriateness and Creativity article as well, so we can link to that as well. So, well, Cyndi, it's been really great talking, and look forward to seeing what comes out of the next book as that sort of percolates and bubbles along.
Thank you so much for having me.
That'll do it for today. Thanks for listening. If you didn't hate it, please give us a quick review on iTunes. We record weekly and sometimes multiple episodes per week. Questions? Email us at podcast@teachthought.com or find us on the Teach Thought Twitter account @TeachThought.